So today I'm going to be reading this fan fiction. It's called It Just Is Randall / Elias. It's by Suck My Spock and was written in 2007, November 8th. 2007, November 8th. Its rating is PG-15. The summary is: tragedy strikes for our favorite little freak, and Randall's attitude towards him changes. Aww. Disclaimer: Kevin Smith's the genius, I'm just the fangirl. But hopefully others enjoy it. Smiley face. Also, I may continue this in the future as I've left the ending quite open. I did just plan for it to be slashy, so maybe a slashy sequel is in store. Okay, let's get started. I'll write all of you guys when I'm there. Only they don't let us send out letters, Elias shrugged casually as he added the last bit, the smile never leaving his face. So I'll just have to give them to you when I get back. Randall almost couldn't believe someone could be so excited about going away to Bible camp. Hell, excitement was probably an understatement when it came to Elias. He'd been talking about this for weeks, and the day he was leaving was finally here. Summer had fallen upon them, and Randall was more than a little bit bored with saying his goodbyes. It was hotter outside than he would have preferred, and the video store was nice and air-conditioned. Dante, and Becky were all standing outside the quick stop, while Elias's parents' car was on the curb, running and waiting for the little freak. This is the second time they've called him little freak. Becky pulled him into a little hug, as if willing him to shut up. I'm sure you'll have a blast, she said, eyes widening for emphasis. As you do every time, right? He nodded, looking like a little kid, and before any of them could react, he pulled Dante into a dangerous-looking hug. The older man's eyes widened, and he uncomfortably patted Elias on the back while Randall snickered under his breath. He was just about to make a comment to Dante when Elias was suddenly hugging him as well. I'll even miss you, Randall, he said into the blonde's chest, and Randall wrinkled his nose slightly, not believing they were in this situation. Yeah, whatever, said Randall, holding his hands up and clear of touching Elias. Elias stepped back, beaming at them. In an enthusiastic wave, he rushed to climb into the back seat of his parents' car. Becky and Dante quickly waved as the car pulled away from the curb, while Randall kept his hands on his hips, squinting in the sunlight. Kid's old enough to be a counselor at this camp, he muttered. Becky side-glanced him, grinning that grin that said she was practically reading his mind. Women were evil. You're gonna miss them, aren't you? She said. More than my little black heart wants me to, he admitted. He threw them both glares. Tell him that and you'll regret it. And with that, Randall Graves turned on his heels and marched back to the video store. I can't do this anymore. Okay. Randall had tried to ignore his mother's knocking for a moment or two as he sat at his desk, flipping carelessly through a magazine. But when he finally realized she wasn't going anywhere, he sighed and rolled his eyes. What? He shouted through his bedroom door. Dante's on the phone, she called to him. His brow furrowed and he looked at his own phone, wondering why he hadn't heard it ring. Then he remembered that he'd unhooked it a few nights before to stop getting calls from Elias, who'd gotten his number from Becky. Women are evil. He stood up and walked to the door, throwing it open none too gently. His mother held out the cordless phone, raising one of her eyebrows in a very Graves way, and Randall all but snatched it from her. Thanks, Ma, he said, and shut the door in her face. What's up? He then asked Dante, sitting back down on his desk. Jesus Christ, Randall, came the other man's voice. Do you know how long I was waiting? Randall was about to make a smart comment until he recognized the sound in Dante's voice, a sound he hadn't heard too often in his life. Something was wrong. What is it? Randall asked seriously. There was a pause before he answered. There was an accident, he said. Elias' parents got ran off the road by some maniac. And for once, Randall was worried about the little freak. Little freak, this is the third fucking time. Okay, here we go. Dante picked him up to take him to the hospital where Becky was already in the waiting room, sifting through a stack of Time magazines with a stiff back and shaky hands. She looked up when they entered. Is this what coworkers do? If I got into a car crash, would my coworkers, come to the hospital? Anyway, and Randall almost surprised to see the tears are budding in her eyes. He never really was one for taking things seriously, but now was different. So what? Randall asked. Dante hadn't told him anything on the way there. The car ride had been completely silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. Is he okay? Becky nodded, taking a deep breath and standing up in front of them. Doctors say he got real lucky, she answered. Apparently the only thing wrong with him is a few bruised ribs and some scratches. Randall let out a breath that he hadn't realized he'd been holding and nodded. Good, he found himself saying before he could stop himself. He nodded again, trying to regulate the air entering his lungs. But his brow furrowed as he realized something. What about his parents? Becky lowered her gaze, mouth opening and closing with no words. Randall looked at Dante, who gave a little jerk of his head. Randall wasn't sure of whether that was a nod or a shake. Not so good, he answered. There's only a slim chance of them making it. Randall grabbed the nearest chair and sank into it, eyes closing and head resting back. This was the kind of stuff that only happened in movies, not to people you knew. This was written before Clerks 3 came out. People you considered your friends. He swallowed hard and opened his eyes again to find himself staring at the white ceiling. It was almost blinding, and perhaps he thought if he stared hard enough, a hole to the past would open up and he'd be able to stop things from happening. Dante sat down tentatively beside him, while Becky remained standing, hugging herself and taking controlled breaths so as not to cry. Randall opened his mouth, but realized he didn't know what to say, and then promptly fell close again. Movement to his left caused him to look, and a man in white stopped before them. Before Randall could even register that he was a doctor, Dante jumped to his feet, and Becky attacked him with a question. How is he? Can we see him? Is he awake? Can we see him? Is he okay? Can we see him? The doctor, obviously used to seeing this kind of thing before, waited patiently for their assault to end, and when they'd both exhausted their voices with repeated questions, he sighed. He is awake, and he's very much aware of what happened. If not for the physical injuries, I'd say he was perfectly fine. Dante sighed a sigh of relief, while Becky clutched at her chest. Randall could only sit behind him, trying to understand what was happening. Just earlier today, he'd seen Elias' parents, both of them gushing and beaming like the little freak himself. Fourth little freak. Both so excited to see that Elias had friends. Well, Dante said, crossing his arms, when can we see him? We can't allow more than one person back there this time, being that it's so late, the doctor said. By you any chance, Randall? Dante shook his head. That's Randall, he said, pointing over his shoulder. The doctor leaned over slightly to see him, and Randall raised a hand in a feeble attempt of a wave. Realizing he'd been brought into this conversation, the blonde stood up, nearing his friends. He seemed really set on finding out if you'd come, the doctor told Randall. Would you like to see him first? Randall glanced between Dante and Becky, both of whom were nodding, and he nodded himself, still unable to speak. As he followed the doctor down the blinding halls of the hospital, he found he couldn't concentrate on where he was going. All the room numbers were blurred. All the people seemed to look alike. It was all so surreal. But when the doctor ushered him into Elias's room, and he saw the little freak, fifth little freak, sitting up in a bed, a couple of white bandages on the right side of his jaw, everything seemed to be okay for the time being. Elias was okay. I'll be right down the hall, the doctor said before he stepped out, closing the door. Randall shuffled slowly closer to the bed, and Elias smiled at him, a weak smile, but a smile nonetheless. Hey, he said, you came. Randall nodded, pulling a chair up to the bed and perching on it. Yeah, he said, voice sounding hoarse. Of course. How are you? A-okay, Elias said. My side kind of hurts, but I'm fine. Are the others here? Randall nodded again. Yeah, the doc wouldn't let them come back with me, he answered. Becky's a mess. Elias gave a little snort. Women, he said. That's a good one. And Randall couldn't imagine how he could be so calm after being in a car accident. Unless he didn't know about his parents' worsening conditions. Stares into the camera. Elias, Randall said. Your parents, have you seen them? Elias asked, curious and excited even. No, Randall answered. The doctors probably wouldn't let me. They're in intensive care, Elias. They might not. Elias smiled again. Don't worry, he said. They'll be fine. He won't let them die. He didn't let them die, did he? Randall felt something of a pang in his chest, and he found he didn't have the heart to discourage the kid. Instead, he forced a half smile into his face, swallowing back the words that threatened to spill out like vomit, and said, No, he didn't. Elias was released the very next day, while his parents still struggled for their lives in the ICU. Dante had taken the kid home for a change of clothes, while Becky and Randall went to the hospital cafeteria. Why did they go there? Anyways, Randall glared into his order of french fries, while she nursed a hot tea across from him. Neither of them had really spoken since Elias's release, but after a long while, Becky opened her mouth first. He seems so sure, she said. So sure they'll be okay. Yeah, Randall said. He shrugged his shoulder lazily. They might. Let's face reality here, Randall, she said before shaking her head. Poor guy, we should tell him. Warn him that things might not go so well. I tried, Randall said, not looking up at her. You should have seen the look on the kid's face, though. No way I was going to rain over his parade. Rain on his parade. Okay, I don't get this because they're literally... Okay, the pun here is that they spelt rain wrong, but they're both pronounced the same, so I don't really understand that. Okay. Becky corrected softly. Yeah, whatever. A silence settled over them like a blanket, and Randall attempted to eat a little bit, though the fries tasted like cardboard. This is really not what I thought I'd be doing this weekend, Randall said quietly. What did you have planned? Becky asked, sitting at home. For your information, Randall answered, I was going to go to this convention. A bunch of actresses were going to be there. And when you say actresses, do you mean porno stars? Becky asked. And you accuse me of being mean, Randall said. Have a heart, Bex. Jeez. Okay. She smiled, and he wondered if he looked as tired as she was. Before either of them could speak again, however, Dante and Elias seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Elias sat down next to Randall while Dante slowly lowered himself into the seat beside Becky. He looked like hell, too. Randall glanced at Elias out of the corner of his eye. He was now wearing just a pair of jeans and some Christian-y t-shirt, the small bandage on his cheek being only visible sign that something had happened to him. How do you feel? Becky asked him. Great, Elias said optimistically. Have they said anything about my parents yet? Becky looked at Randall and then at Dante. The three of them struggled to think of something to say, but Elias didn't notice apparently. Finally, Randall spoke up. Nothing yet, he said, which can be good? Dante shrugged and Becky made a face as Randall glanced at them. He hadn't known what to say, but it seemed to work for Elias, who happily stole some of his cardboard fries and started to eat. At least they weren't going to waste. Okay. Here we go. Okay. The news didn't come as a surprise to Randall, Dante, and Becky. They were hanging out in the waiting room when the doctor approached them, Elias having gone off to the bathroom. The doctor sadly told the three of them the boy's parents didn't pull through, and after delivering the news, Dante told him it'd be the best if they were the ones to break it to Elias. The doctor nodded before walking away, and Randall was left to wonder if doctors really were sorry when they had to tell people about deaths. If not, they were some good actors. God damn it, dyslexia. Elias came back, wiping his wet hands on the thighs of his jeans. A small smirk was on his face, and he was optimistic as ever. You guys wouldn't believe how clean it was in there, he said, before noticing their expressions. What? Randall looked at Dante, who looked at Becky, who looked at Randall. After a moment, Becky stepped forward some, wringing her hands in front of her. Elias, she said slowly, the doctor was just here. Your parents, they didn't make it. His smirk instantly faded, and he looked at Randall, which surprised the blonde, of course. With all the shit he'd put Elias through, the kid still seemed to think so highly of him. Randall didn't know what to say, so he quickly averted his gaze and gave a stiff nod. He'd never had to tell someone their parents were dead before, especially not someone so parent-dependent like Elias. You're lying, Elias accused. They can't be dead. Elias, Dante spoke up. I know this is hard to take in, but there was nothing the doctors could do. Your parents are gone. That came out way meaner than he would have said it in real life. Okay. Randall had to give it up for Dante and Becky. It wasn't exactly easy to explain stuff like this. But again, Elias looked to Randall, as if the blonde would explode with laughter and tell him that they were just joking. It was obvious by the plea in his eyes that that's what Elias wanted to happen. Randall cleared his throat, nodding again, and once more tearing his gaze away from the kids. The next few minutes didn't register so much to Randall as it all surprised him, and things happened in a blur. Instead of saying anything, Elias turned to the next thing any of them knew, he was all but racing down the hall towards the ICU. Dante started to go after him, but Becky grabbed his arm slightly, and Randall was rooted to the spot. The doctor who'd given them the news had been talking to one of the nurses, but at the sight of Elias, he stepped forward, and as he attempted to stop the kid from going any further down the hall, Elias started to beg, his words coming out jumbled, just like mine. And he seemed to be asking more things than the doctor could do. Finally, however, the doctor obliged the biggest plea and started to escort near hysterical Elias down the hall. Randall stared after them, partly in shock, and Becky hugged Dante, crying once more. Alright, so his parents are dead. Got that? Elias was gone a long time. Becky had dozed off, laying across three of those hard plastic chairs, while Dante sat on the floor in front of her, arms on his raised knees. Randall had been leaning against the wall beside them for a while, before excusing himself to go get some air. When he stepped outside, he hadn't expected to find Elias there, but he was, sitting on the ground, his back against the wall, knees drawn up. It was dark out, so Randall couldn't really make out his expression. It seemed blank. Randall stared at him for a moment, contemplating whether or not he should pretend he hadn't even seen him, before he finally neared him. He dropped to the ground beside him, sighed heavily, crossing his legs Indian style. Classic 2007. Oh shit, hey, he said. How long you been out here? I don't know, Elias said quietly. It wasn't completely stony, which made Randall feel a little better. Didn't you think you could let us know or anything? Randall said, keeping his tone as light and playful as he could. The waiting room doesn't even have a TV. Elias's lips flickered, as if he wanted to smile, but it was gone in an instant. After a long moment of silence, he said, He took them away from me, Randall. I don't understand it. Randall shifted uncomfortably, looking out towards the parking lot, watching as a young woman pushed an older one in a wheelchair, taking her towards one of the sliding doors. She passed Randall a polite smile, and he gave a jerky head motion in return, knowing it would come off awkward-looking. They weren't sinners or anything, Elias said. They lived perfect lives. Why did he do it? He's an asshole, Randall said. Don't know why nobody ever listens to me when I say that. He side-eyed Elias again before adding, Look, I know I can't make you feel any better, but maybe it's just their time. Maybe he couldn't believe he was about to say something so corny, but he forced it out anyway. Maybe he wanted to spend some time with them. You can't hog them to yourself forever, you know. That was kind of cute. Okay. Elias smiled this time. In the headlights of a passing car, Randall was able to see the wetness on the kid's cheeks, and he made himself look away quickly. They used to tell me that kind of stuff, he said. I just always thought they'd go when they were old and had experienced full lives. Silence covered them again, and Randall pulled a pack of gum out of his pocket. One piece left. He glanced at Elias, at the gum, and at Elias again, before extending it towards him. He'd really wanted a piece of gum, but as Elias took it, he gave Randall one of those looks that normally would have creeped Randall out, but this time it didn't. This time it made Randall actually feel good. Aww. Wait until I tell Jay and Bob about this, Elias said, attempting a joke, despite his apparent melancholy. They'll never believe me. And I'll wring your neck, Randall said without missing a beat. No, you wouldn't, Elias said, as he gave Randall a sly look, almost as if he knew Randall had actually stopped fantasizing about hurting him ever since they'd reopened the quick stop. They both fell silent once more, and it felt like they'd been sitting there for ages before either one of them spoke again. So if you were at camp, Randall said, just trying for conversation. The silence actually bothered him this time. What would you be doing, singing Kumbaya around a campfire? Elias looked at him as if he were crazy. No, he said. We'd be having our welcoming feast, and then we'd spend the rest of the night talking about the things we did before camp. You know what I'd plan to do today? Randall asked. Elias was silent, waiting for an answer. I was supposed to go to a porn convention. Meet some of the lovely ladies I've already seen naked on my TV. He side-glanced at Elias to see him making a face, and then he grinned. It faltered as he realized he wasn't at a porn convention. He was at a hospital where they'd just been told Elias's parents had passed away. He swallowed and gave a little sigh. We should go back inside, he said, gesturing with a thumb over his shoulder. Elias nodded, wiping at his eyes with the backs of his hands as he climbed to his feet. Randall couldn't help but feel the thing that he wasn't used to again, that pang in his chest. He made a vow to treat Elias better, if only for a little while. Right now, the kid needed him more than ever. The end. I just think it's really awesome that someone in 2007 watched the Clerks 2 movie and thought to themselves, what if Elias Grover's parents died in a car crash? Anyways, I think that fanfic was better than any of the Kevin Smith movies combined. I especially like how Elias's parents died in it. That was my highlight. I especially like that it was by a car crash. How do we tell him?